I recently published a recipe for a 100% hydration sandwich bread made with white flour. That video turned out to be quite popular and a few people asked me for a whole wheat version. So here it is. It's basically identical. There are only two real differences. The first one is that this dough requires one less fold, and of course it's made with whole wheat flour instead of white flour. This dough is just as easy to handle as the other one. In fact, it's easier, because the bran in whole wheat flour absorbs water a bit better, which makes this dough slightly tighter, and that is also why it requires one less fold than the white flour version. You could easily increase the hydration of this dough to 110% without any issues, or even higher, but I'll leave those experiments up to you. For now, let's get on with it. Let me show you how it's made, starting with the ingredients. We'll need some whole wheat bread flour, yeast, salt, olive oil, and water. The flour that I'm using has a protein content of 13%. That is probably a minimum requirement for a dough like this. If your flour is weaker, use less water. When it comes to the equipment, we'll need a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe, and a baking tin. I'm using my trusty USA pan Pullman tin. It measures 23 centimeters or 9 inches long, 10 centimeters or 4 inches deep, and 10 centimeters or 4 inches wide. If you are using a regular 2-pound loaf tin, I would suggest reducing the amount of ingredients by a quarter. Okay, let's start making the dough. First things first, temperature control. My kitchen is around 21 degrees Celsius or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. My water is at 23 degrees Celsius or 73 degrees Fahrenheit. And I want my final dough temperature to be around the same. Usually I would make the dough slightly warmer, but because this is 100% whole wheat, it will ferment more rapidly. So making it slightly cooler will prevent over fermentation. Okay, to make the dough, in a large bowl, combine the water, the yeast and the salt. Mix well to dissolve the salt completely. Then add the flour and mix to a dough. Of course, calling it a dough at this point is a bit inaccurate. It's more of a batter, but that's okay. After a few folds, it'll be nice and cohesive. Once your dough is fully mixed, pour the olive oil in a clean bowl and then scrape the dough into it. The oil is there to enrich the dough slightly. At just below 3%, its effects will be minimal, but they'll be there. And we don't want to add too much to a wet dough like this. It is already loose enough. Let's give the dough a quick temperature check. Just below 24 degrees Celsius or 74 degrees Fahrenheit is perfect for this. So let's cover it up now, leave it in the fridge to cool down for 30 minutes. We must develop some gluten in order for this dough to be able to trap gas effectively. And because I don't use my mixer and I refuse kneading dough by hand, folding is my go-to method. To perform a fold, wet your hand with water, release the dough from the bowl and then fold it over itself, going around in a circle. Once the dough becomes difficult to pull over itself, flip it upside down so the seam is on the bottom. And then you can kind of fold it underneath itself a couple of times. And it's already looking better. Now let's cover it up and leave it chill down for another 30 minutes. After 30 minutes of chilling, remove the dough from the fridge and perform the second fold. The second fold is performed exactly the same way as the first one. Once the dough is nice and tight, cover it up and refrigerate it for 30 more minutes. Now after the final chilling stage, we'll give the dough the final fold. This time, I decided to do it slightly differently. This is optional, you can just repeat the same fold as earlier, but you can also do it like this. Wet your hands with water, lift the dough out of the bowl, then fold its sides down and then back up into the center of it. This is just another method, it's just as effective. Which one you use is up to you, or whichever method you choose. After the final fold, place the dough back into the fridge for the long cold fermentation of around 12 to 24 hours. It is the next day now. Before I do the final shaping, I'll prepare the baking tin. For some reason, this dough likes to stick to my tin. So as a precaution, this time I'm lining it with a little bit of paper. To make the paper stick to the tin, brush it with some oil. That way it will stay in place as you put the dough inside the tin. And here's our nicely fermented dough. It is nice and wobbly, nice and big, super bubbly, and it smells beautiful. Now we can do the final shaping. If you don't want to use oil, like I am, you can brush the dough with water to prevent it from sticking. But you know, a little bit of olive oil never hurt anyone. Release the dough from the tin using your dough scraper, and the final shaping method is basically a coil fold. Pick the dough up by the sides and then roll it underneath itself. Do it from the front as well as the back. Once it's nice and tight, pick it up and place it in the baking tin with one smooth move. Don't hesitate here. If you hold it too long, it'll stretch down. Just pick it up and place it down immediately. Now cover up the tin and leave it for the final proof. It took me around 2.5 hours at around 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Let the dough rise until it reaches almost the top of the tin. Towards the end of the final proof, preheat the oven 250 degrees Celsius, 480 Fahrenheit, fan on. If your oven doesn't have a fan, keep it at the same temperature. If your baking tin doesn't have a lid like mine, you can cover it with some foil. If you are interested in this tin, you can find it in an Amazon shop, link below. Right, let's get this bad boy in the oven. As soon as you close the oven door, turn the temperature down to 200 degrees Celsius, that is 390 Fahrenheit. If your oven doesn't have a fan, go for 220 or 430 Fahrenheit. Bake the bread for 40 minutes. Then, remove it from the oven and remove it from the tin. I used my dough scraper to release it and make it come out easier. But it's not quite ready yet. I always like to place a loaf like this back into the oven to finish off the crust. This time, it will only take 5 minutes. After the final baking stage, take it out of the oven, leave it to cool down completely, on a rack, ideally. And there you have it, that's how you make a whole wheat sandwich bread, which contains equal parts flour and water. The extreme high hydration gives it a very unique texture. It is bouncy, squishy, chewy, and super moist. And the flavor is nice and intense, thanks not only to the high hydration, but also to the long cold fermentation. And look how beautifully it slices. I mean, I am using a brand new knife, but still, it's quite satisfying. If you made the white flour version, you must make this one. And if you're just looking for something different to bake, give this a try. It is super simple and the result is awesome.